What does the word gutsy mean to you?
Chutzpah. Just having that, I would call that self-advocacy in anything you do. Just saying, like, I know and I will find what's right for me.
You're listening to the Gutsy Podcast, where we talk about all things real, raw, and ridiculous about running a business authentically. Whether you need an inspirational pick-me-up or a swift kick in the mental ass, the Gutsy Podcast is your bi-weekly guide to getting out of your head and back into action. I'm Laura Ora, branding and mindset coach for female entrepreneurs, CEO of Works & Co., and your host on this journey through entrepreneurship. It's time to fuel your gutsy. We talk a lot about trusting your energetic gut. But if you're tuning in today, I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that you have been fighting with your physical gut for quite some time. You've probably also tried it all: the supplements, the exercises, the diet, the lifestyle changes, but your gut seems to have a mind of its own. Today, we're chatting with Dr. Melanie Keller about getting to the root of your gut issues so that you can finally start to feel good again. Dr. Melanie Keller, ND, is known as the intuitive edge doctor because she helps people understand their body, lives, and businesses better so that they can receive the curated care that they need and deserve. She is an IBS and SIBO expert and uses her naturopathic expertise, epigenetic intuition, and Ahai 7D energy to get results. Her binaural beat meditation has received 5-star reviews on Insight Timer, and she has been featured in Forbes Health, Insider, Well and Good, and ABC's The List TV. Before we chat with Melanie, I want to let you know that the membership for the Gutsy Collective Inner Circle is officially open. This is a community for driven women who crave to be around other driven women for support, for knowledge, for tangible ways to grow your life and your business, to get out of your own way. Now, this is not one of those groups where I'm going to give you everything and the kitchen sink, and if you wait to call now, I'm going to double the offer. Because let's be honest, while some of that stuff is useful, it doesn't get used. It just sits on your computer. So this group is simple, okay? Once a month, we're going to have mindset classes together live. Once a month, we're going to have intuitive coaching sessions where you get to ask your specific questions. There's a Facebook community where we can talk in between, and you get access to my Power Back course. Bada bing, bada boom. There's also some upgrades. You can learn all about this stuff on my website if you go to lauraora.com and click on Join the Gutsy Collective at the top. The point is, if you're looking for intentional connection, tangible ways that you can implement shit to make change that you can actually see and feel, and want to be surrounded by people that fucking cheer for you, the Gutsy Collective might be your next best move. So again, go to lauraora.com, click on Join the Gutsy Collective, and I'll see you on the inside. Dr. Melanie, welcome to the Gutsy Podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Absolutely. So I love a good story. So tell me a little bit about your journey. What has led you to where you are with us today?
Oh, well, let's see. I grew up in Southeast Alaska in a really small town. Moved there like in first grade, so it was like a little bit of a shock from being in the lower 48. But at the time, I really grew up suffering from constipation. I'm just going to get right
Let's get
to
right into the gut.
and I had this pristine lifestyle with, freshly caught fish and spring water from the mountain, and grew up granola style in the sense of like everything was super healthy, and I just suffered. I mean, I was 16 years old when my mom asked me, like, when was the last time you had a bowel movement? I was, kind of rolled my eyes and was like, I don't know, like maybe a month ago. And she just flipped out. She was just like, oh
Whoa.
my God, no. And we were so rural that she had to get on the phone and talk to a health food store in Juneau and have it be flown up on a small plane. And it was all this fiber and dandelion, all these herbs, which was great. But it did absolutely nothing for me. Not increasing fiber, not walking, not, drinking more water, all of these like standard basic things. And it was, of course, it was embarrassing. I like to say, when did we stop talking about our diapers? Right? Because it's like, it's so important to know about your child at the beginning. It's something we know about the elderly at the end. But in between, it's not really something that is, some households do, mind you, mine did not until this moment, right? And it was like this shock, and I'm embarrassed and all these things, right? So I got really into herbal remedies and reading, and I worked at the local health food store because these things didn't help me. And then as I went through undergraduate, and a lot of things led me to being a non-traditional student in naturopathic medical school. And while I was there, it was a similar situation of like these herbs, this, increase the flax, do more walking, make sure they're drinking enough water, and all of these other natural remedies that were not working for me. And it was like I wanted to raise my hand or stand up and scream and shout and say, but what else do you have? And thankfully there was a professor who said, if all of these things that we're recommending, all of these herbs, all of these recommendations, you listen to the patient. Like, you have to listen. You don't just keep giving them supplements and keep them in this hamster wheel. And I was like, thank God, like, what else do you have? And he had just written this book. And there was a teeny tiny little paragraph about small intestine bacterial overgrowth. And I just happened to be extremely lucky and was able to get on a lottery like internship with him. And then after graduation, I continued an internship with him. And after passing my boards, he actually invited me to start a center at the university, the SIBO Center in Portland. And that just gave me this direct insight to looking at breath test results. If people don't know, you do a breath test to find out if you have intestinal overgrowth in your small intestine. And we actually now know that there's a new term specifically for constipation because it's a different microbe, and that microbe can be throughout the entire colon. So we actually refer to that as intestinal methane overgrowth. Well, that's what I had. I had an overgrowth of methane, and methane are these very ancient, archaic, archaea is the type of microbe they are. And when they're releasing this methane, it slows down our gut motility. And it also exponentiates our calories. So for those of you who have been eating the specific amount of caloric, let's say 1,500 calories, and you're attempting to lose weight, or somebody's kind of beaten that into you, because that's part of my story too. And you go, I swear I'm not cheating, I'm not eating extra calories. However, if you have these microbes in your gut, it's as if you have been eating 3,000 calories, by the way.
Well, that's
Yeah,
unfortunate.
exactly. Right. So this is really helpful if you're a hunter gatherer, and there are certain tribes that they actually have identified this methane is very helpful for them. However, in our world, industrialized and regular meals, this is not so helpful. So when I was able to identify that I had this, I was like, okay, I'm the poster child for this. Myself and another colleague, we would, exchange notes, and there were many, many things that we found that, again, were these recommendations we would give to people that were, quite frankly, just making things worse. One thing I can think of in particular was a stint of keto that I did. And methane love fat. They specifically love saturated fat. So these like little coconut oil, flax, cacao little ball things that I was making was just making it worse, and you're just about ready to pull your hair out. So yeah, I spent a lot of time. I've seen thousands of breath tests. I've seen people from all over the world. And it was just really interesting to me to see that there were these patterns in terms of if anybody has gone through this process with their practitioner, I would always say to people, okay, well, I'm going to look at your breath test and I'm going to see what the gas levels are to start with. And I had this forecast of estimating this particular amount of reduction per round of treatment. So somebody going and being told or thinking it's going to just take 2 weeks for them to eradicate this problem, that's not always the case, because it's more complicated than that. Because we have hydrogen as well as methane, and then we have a third player called hydrogen sulfide. And many people equate hydrogen SIBO, which it is, it's a bacteria that's making the hydrogen, but it's actually just the Pac-Man pellets for Miss Pac-Man methane, who likes four of those hydrogen, and then hydrogen sulfide likes five. So the problem is that if somebody's just treating their hydrogen or treating their hydrogen and methane, if you're not getting rid of that fuel source, methane will kind of go dormant and kind of be like, you can't kill me this way. Or if you're having a keto diet, if you're doing all of these really restrictive things that are kind of out there about what not to do, like don't ever eat onions again, don't touch chocolate, all these things that I want to liberate people to say, no, no, we should be able to have these things again. But if we're not addressing that fuel source, then you're just going to keep running through this hamster wheel. That's the biggest thing that I'd like to get across to people, because after seeing so many breath tests and seeing these patterns of reduction, I mean, one of the most challenging things is when you have this methane and you have a certain amount of hydrogen, like I say, is that fuel source. So the hydrogen goes down, but then the methane goes up. So somebody has a repeat breath test and they're thinking, oh, and even placebo is powerful, right? So they think they're feeling better, but they get this breath test back and their methane levels have gone up. And that can just be a challenge. And so I was seeing this clinically, I was experiencing it myself, and I was like, what in the world is going on here? It doesn't help for us to give more restrictive eating. It doesn't help for us to do one more round of herbals or say, this is my biggest annoyance. Herbals take longer, because that's bullshit. Okay, let me just tell you that herbs are powerful, and they're so powerful that we shouldn't be on them for extended periods of time. I've seen people on high level of oregano oil for way too long, and we don't have evidence to know what that's doing to the rest of our gut microbiome. Is that making sense? Like it's
Absolutely.
always this kill, 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 and I'm like, no, no, no. We also have to restore. And if we're killing and we're restricting our food and we're restricting these prebiotics and this really well diversified eating plan, because you're on FODMAPs for longer than, quite frankly, longer than 6 weeks, we really shouldn't. That's a prescribed eating plan. And if you're not having somebody monitor that and you just continue to restrict these things, those are our prebiotics. And then on the flip side, you'll have well, here you go, just buy the $70 probiotic. Well, my challenge is we already have too much bacteria. Why are we going to put more traffic into the traffic jam?
Mm.
Okay. And people will think that that's what they need, because one of the treatments is using antibiotics. So I would just like to speak to that, because depending on the practitioner someone is going to, yes, we've come a long way where they're now in the algorithm. You can take broad spectrum antibiotics, and some insurance will make sure that you go through these broad spectrum antibiotics first before we get to one that's actually eubiotic, that's EU biotic. And let me just clarify that. The broad spectrum antibiotics are things that we take when we have an infection. So we have a sinus problem, we have something going, bronchitis. There are things that are itises, which is an inflammation, but also can be because of a pathogen, something that's bad that we need to get rid of, and we need to take a certain course of broad spectrum antibiotic. The downside of that is that it can affect our microbiome elsewhere, in particular the vagina, let's say. So sometimes you'll take a course of antibiotic, but then you'll have a disruption in your vaginal, like maybe anything can get thrown off down there, and that's not fun. Right. And so this is where people get this, okay, well, I'm taking this broad spectrum antibiotic that is wiping out all of my good guys. So therefore, I need to take a probiotic with that. And we've actually have evidence now to say that that's not true. And this is at the American College of Gastroenterology guidelines from 2018 that said, actually, folks, maybe we shouldn't be recommending this. This is actually only the case in certain conditions, and it's more of an inflammatory bowel condition. So that's one of the things that I see that can be kind of a back and forth. And, I understand it because it's out there, and all due professional courtesy and respect, if your gastro or your health practitioner just, prescribe this for you, I would just say, be mindful if it's not helping you. Like, be, you have to self advocate sometimes and say, well, actually, I heard this podcast, or actually, this does exist. Now, they are going to be updating the American College of Gastroenterology guidelines actually this year. So there'll be some new things that might be presented. But again, they are looking for these things to ensure that this is, helpful for a majority of people, right? We always have the N of one, which is why I like to narrow in and be very curated with my care with people. However, that's just something that I like to get across to people. Whereas 10 years ago, when I was treating people for this, the main drug that we really like to use is called Xifaxan, or the generic is rifaximin. And that is eubiotic. So, what I mean by that is that this specifically stays in the tube. It's not going into our bloodstream. It's not going to affect other areas of our body. And it's only getting rid of the good guys, because SIBO and emo is not a bad guy. These are just the good guys in the wrong compartment. They got stuck in the traffic. So it's not an infection. It's not something we need to kill incessantly. However, this antibiotic does get rid of these gram-negative bacteria. They're like, sorry, you guys can't be here. So we're going to have to, quote, wipe you out. However, when this drug goes through into the large intestine, it turns into a probiotic. So it's already doing the job that I just was referring to, right? Of saying, okay, we have to have these probiotics. Now, we could do some really healthy prebiotic food while we're on a broad spectrum antibiotic. We could be filling ourselves up with, healthy grains and fibrous vegetables, and doing that to support yourself in like a pre-probiotic way. But I'd just like to emphasize, because sometimes people will even be afraid to take an antibiotic, and they'll come and see me as a naturopath, assuming, let's do it a different way, which is great and has so many tools. It's almost like an abundance of tools. However, the point is that we don't want to be on a kill phase forever, and if somebody gets this antibiotic, this rifaximin, Xifaxan, I say, that's great. I mean, if especially because it used to be around $1,500 for a 2-week course 10 years ago. So if someone can get it for just their, copay or what have you, or get a coupon, then I like to say, let's give it a shot, because that could be your best friend, to be honest with you. And it really is helpful for certain cases of people who will have a propensity to relapse. And so sometimes I like to say, even if and the other point is, with the broad spectrum, we want to complete the entire course, right? That's that whole, if they give it to you for 7 days, you want to take it for the entire 7 days and not stop. Whereas with Xifaxan and rifaximin, now I am speaking to this off-label use. I've been doing this for a number of years. So I'm going to say this is not standard, but I'm just letting people know that this is done. Where if somebody might have their 42 count, or they get their refill, and I like to tell them, hang on to it. Like, let's have that in the medicine cabinet if you don't complete the full course because you're already feeling better, or you already have a negative breath test, because it might be, again, that like save the day. I had a CEO once getting on an airplane, was like, oh boy, like, we have a problem. And I was like, okay, do you have any of your rifaximin with you? Yes, I do. Okay, let's get started with, I mean, in that case, I even had him start with a half tablet, and then by the time he landed, he had had like maybe one full tablet, and he's like, oh, I'm good to go. I can even go to dinner tonight. I can even have a drink. That's what I was here for. This was a really important event. And that just like, handled the situation quickly. And if he didn't have that necessarily, it's not to say I don't have other tools, but it was really nice that they had that handy, is my point.
Yeah. I have like 8,000 questions.
I know I've just been going.
This is one of those topics that's near and dear to me. I've been a gut health struggler for the last 25 years. So, and I think that that's the case for more people than not, right? Because it's such a journey that feels like it's so underappreciated or under like value, that like this is a real ass problem that affects our daily life all the time. every single day, right? With every single meal sometimes. And, I think that what seems to be anyway, the blanket diagnosis is IBS, right? Like, okay, you've got stuff going on with your gut, you've got constipation, you've got diarrhea, you get bloated, you get gas, you have IBS. Talk to me a little bit about what IBS is, and is there more to it than what we're being told?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean this to be put a little bit of humor behind it and hope everyone's in the mood for that. But it's a diagnosis of we don't know
Yeah.
oftentimes.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge of it because and that's why it's so expensive and mm, not everybody wants to necessarily fix the problem of the underlying cause because it's a moneymaker, let's be honest. If it takes you 10 years to get that diagnosis, if you have to continue to go and see that specialist, if you have to go get a second colonoscopy, cha-ching, cha-ching, okay? Which is why I'm very passionate about the people who have done this research. And so I'm really glad that you asked because we now know with certainty that a history of food poisoning can be the underlying cause of this problem to begin with. Now, this isn't all IBS, but it's about 60% of IBS.
Interesting.
So, what's really fascinating, yeah, and it's very in particular to a bacterial food poisoning. So, oftentimes when we're referring to food poisoning, it's a gastroenteritis. We usually have it for a few days where you go, uh-oh, what happened? Especially as constipated folk, we might have loose stool and be like, hallelujah. But at the same time, you don't necessarily feel so good. It might take you out of work for a day or two, and then you turn to the other people who also went to the barbecue, and you go, "How are you feeling?" And they go, they usually have the rock gut, right? And they're like, "Nah, I'm fine." And so not all food poisoning is bacterial. It can be viral, but when it's bacterial, so let's say that 100 of us go to the wedding, and we all have the salmonella chicken. Only 10 of us are going to have this response, which is an actual autoimmune response to the toxin that's left behind by salmonella. So there are four culprits that have the same exact toxin that they all release, and it's called cytolethal distending toxin, B in particular. And that toxin looks so much like this particular motor complex nerve in our gut that's like the light switch to get things moving along. It's called the migrating motor complex. And this migrating motor complex happens between meals after we've eaten. We want the food to be in the small intestine. That's where all of the absorption happens. That's where our neurotransmitters, our feel good hormones, our serotonin, dopamine, all these things are being made. I'm sure you've heard that are made in the gut, 90+%. And so if we have traffic, or I like to call it like lint in the dryer vent,
Mm.
right? That could start a fire if you don't remove that lint, or it's just going to decrease the efficiency of that dryer. Then you have a problem with absorption. So we have a problem with absorbing our nutrients, in particular fat soluble vitamins and hormones. Like there's just a lot that can get screwed up in there. That's why it doesn't feel good. You have brain fog, you don't have energy. Like it's more than just the bloat and the bowel function, right? So this point is that there's a certain period of time that should be getting digested, and then this cleaning wave should just whoosh it through. And so if we've had this food poisoning, we can get this trigger or this autoimmunity to this motor complex nerve called vinculin. And if we have elevated antibodies in both, so there's a particular test for this that can say, yes, you've had a food poisoning and just that, but even that alone is a positive. Okay. Because this antibody can remain elevated between 5 and 10 years,
Wow.
just so you know. Okay. Of course, we're all trying to avoid food poisoning. But now this person with the positive antibody is that much, it's like 10 times more susceptible to another food poisoning. And let me just also say that food poisoning does not always happen in animal protein. So many people think that they're vegetarian, they're vegan, they're clear. That is not the case whatsoever. I don't know if people have seen or remember there was romaine lettuce that was having a problem for a number of sequential years, actually, I've seen flour be recalled. Oftentimes it doesn't make the news, but I happen to follow food safety news because I'm one of these people that's this more susceptible one. And I want to keep my things clear. I want to know. I am selective of where I eat. I mean, not to an obsessive point, but it's like it's a mindful thing. Okay.
Right.
If I'm at a potluck or I'm at a particular, I'm aware of myself for food handling. And because my family is retired from dentistry, so I was around a lot of hand washing and sterilization. But that's also another good point that some things can start in our mouth. So that's one of the questions I have on that follow-up questionnaire. Have you had a dental appointment, period? And people will think, well, I just got a cleaning, or I just had this, or they'll be really thinking they're being proactive, and oh, I just had my amalgam fillings removed. And that's when I go, oh, good. No, you just really stirred shit up. Okay. So there's so much going on, or having that history of sinusitis, and you're swallowing that. You might have that postnasal drip, and that could be, again, stirring up these microbes. But getting back to this food poisoning, I like to refer to it as having a skip in the record. So this migrating motor complex starts in the stomach. That's phase one. We have to have stomach emptying to then get the whole thing going. And then in the middle, phase two is where we're getting all that absorption happening. And then phase three is where we're testing to see if there's a problem. And that's why I refer to it as a skip in the record, because somebody can have their antibodies come back and there's a reference range there. So as a naturopath, again, I'm not just looking at positive, negative. I want to look at, well, how close to positive are they? And so that could at least tell me they've got a scratch in the record, right? But I like to let them know, look, if you have another food poisoning, this could get into a deeper groove. And what do we have to do when we have a groove in the record? You got to get up and move the needle to have that song keep going, right?
Right.
Otherwise, it's going to skip, skip, skip. And you're going to be like, I call it don't blame the broccoli. You're just like, what did I eat? What's wrong?
Yes.
What is it today? So that's where I like to tell people, if you do have a skip in the record, there might be more rules and regulations for you personally, right? You might have to avoid onion. I don't know. I'm just thinking of some of the common things that are out there that kind of get beaten into people's heads. And I was part of it. I was part of this group that created the SIBO diet and the combination of this specific carbohydrate diet with FODMAP. I mean, we were trying to, I call it the marble under the nut. We're like trying to figure this out for masses of people. However, it's so individualized. So please just also know that if something doesn't pertain to you, it doesn't. If you can eat gluten, eat gluten. If you can have more than 3 asparagus spears, have at it. Like, that's what I want people to have, more of that food freedom instead of, oh, I can't have that. Oh, I can't have that. Because if people are in my program, I actually have them make a list of their like desired foods. Grandma's casserole coming up for the holiday, or whatever, or I want a bite of my something or other from my favorite restaurant. And we set those goals up.
One of the things that stands out most to me about driven women is this hyper independency where you gotta do shit on your own. You're the one in charge. You're the one that everyone leans on because you're the strong one, right? But who is that for you? Who do you lean on when you have questions? Who do you go to when you're stuck and confused? And who's celebrating the shit out of your victories as well? Chances are that circle is probably very small, if it even exists. And it's one of the bajillion fucking reasons that I have created the Gutsy Collective Inner Circle. Because strong women need other strong women. Not to mention the clear, concise, intentional ways to actually make movement. I know you don't have time for all that fluffy bullshit. You want to get in, you want to get the knowledge, you want to get the support, and you want to apply it. If that feels like it's missing in your life or something that you're super craving right now, go to lauraora.com, click on Join the Gutsy Collective at the top of the page, and I would absolutely love to support you on the inside. Melanie has a ton more knowledge to share with you today, so let's get back into the second half of today's episode.
Because I want them to be able to see, instead of being in this restrictive eating to kind of go along with their treatment or to think that is the treatment, which I have not seen that be successful, by the way, folks, that I'd rather them eat the way that they want to eat and improve at that eating style versus having a specific diet. I don't even like the D word, having a specific eating plan and then getting their SIBO solved and then going, now I can eat da da da. And then the second they have something, they feel that they topple over backwards and they like have this relapse. This is my point. If you don't know about the skip in the record, if you don't know about this blood test to know if you've had this food poisoning as part of your problem, then you could just kind of stay in this place of madness. I mean, I was there before. I mean, I was here behind the scenes waiting for this test to be available, right? Kind of having that firsthand knowledge. And as soon as it was available, I'm testing everyone because there is right now in medicine, they really emphasize this for diarrhea and mixed. So we can have people who have looser stool, or they can even have like hard to pass, difficult to pass, maybe a rabbit pellet type of a initial stool, and then it could come out softer or liquid or soft serve. I mean, I went from being 16, not wanting to talk about my poo, to all of a sudden I'm like, we're going to get to know each other real well.
We're talking about nothing but poop now at this
Yeah, we're
point.
talking about poo, and or I'll ask people about their gas and their bloating, and my gentle way of saying it is the gas fragrant? And people look at me like, fragrant? Yeah. And I'm like, well, so that's my nice way of asking, does it want to clear a room? I had somebody who was coming to see me who canceled their flight 3 times because they
Wow.
could not be in a confined space. They were actually, ironically, they were an attorney in a human resources department in the DC area, but they had such horrific gas that they were isolated in their workplace. They were isolated from people. They had
Wow.
fans. They had, and I was like, in this day, this would not fly.
No.
Okay, this was 10 years ago. But this was the person who was afraid to get on the subway, afraid to get on an airplane because they had such fragrant gas and very urgent diarrhea. So, yes, we've been talking a lot about constipation. I just wanted to speak to the diarrheal folks. And like you said, on how much it consumes their day. I just had a woman who's in my private program, and she's like, look, because her doctor wasn't too keen on her seeing a naturopath. She was like, naturopath, why are you seeing her? And she says, look, I've been telling you about my problem for 20 years.
Yep.
And you did send me to this specialist. The specialist gave me this one antibiotic, the one I was talking to earlier, and a probiotic. She said, I spent $1,200 getting that prescription, and it did absolutely nothing for me. And I'm still stuck today where myself and my husband know every single bathroom in my specific mile radius.
Yep.
And we have to plan everything in our lives around my gut to now. And I love these testimonials. They are my favorite, where she said it was like initially her husband's like looking at her in the car and like, how you doing? She says, I looked at him like, what? And he's like, oh, you're good? And she's like, good about what? And he's like, holy shit. Like, no, like, do you recognize that you're good? And we've gone from this location to this location. We just ate there, and you ordered the thing that you've always said you wanted to order but never have. And he just loved the fact that it wasn't even occurring to her. So then she had to like message me and be like, oh, check this out. This was the first thing that we noticed. And then it wasn't, and then it was their anniversary where they were able, and I just love hearing those stories, because when you're on the other side of going, well, I haven't had a bowel movement, or I have traveler's constipation, right? Where you're like praying for a release versus somebody who's on the flip side of like serious urgent and like kind of sweating when you're standing somewhere or being in a grocery store, and you're just like, oh no, oh no, oh no, because when nature calls, it might be knocking at the door real loud, and they just have this panic. So I can't even imagine what that's like. But to see or hear the shift for somebody to go from like, I was living this life in constant awareness of bathrooms, to now I'm standing, I love it when people become foodies, and they're like, instead, my husband found me looking at the menu at the airport, going, what am I going to have today? And I'm like, oh, that's the best, right? So that's the biggest thing that I really hope to get across and really help someone here is to know about this blood test. Because, okay, so what if you do have a skip in the record? Because I do have people who have this positive antibody. I'm letting them know that they are going to maybe have a few more rules or guidelines that they are going to be mindful of. But at the same time, I identified, because I was kind of seeing a lot of this, like, we need another round of treatment. Oh, we have this blood test that's positive. So therefore, you're going to be more of a relapser or even a rapid relapser. Now, I'm just thinking to also state that there are other reasons why people can have a lingering SIBO or EMO. And that can be due to endometriosis, for example. So I'm just having some things drop in that I'm like, let's be mindful to state these things, because the endometrial tissue can seed into our abdominal cavity. So that just means it travels out of the pelvis and it goes up into the abdominal cavity, and it can cause adhesions. So what does that mean? It's like this stickiness. It's like this piece of gum on the wall that our intestine gets stuck to. And that can cause these kind of like, we look for right angles when we're doing imagery in patients. So if there's a right angle, because we really should just have curves of our intestine, then that can mean that there is an adhesion that's affecting the situation and affecting the motility. So I just like to let people know, now this can be due to endometriosis, is fairly common in women. And also if somebody's had abdominoplasty, so if they've had a tummy tuck and you've had somebody cut into your abdomen, there can be adhesions that can call, this is a natural occurring thing. When we cut our finger, right, our body starts to want to tie things up, but it can be restrictive for the intestine itself. So that's just something I wanted to let people know. And what's great, I mean, sometimes we need to have surgery to remove these adhesions. Sometimes the surgery actually causes more adhesions. So that can be tricky. They've gotten much better with this with laparoscopic surgery. But depending on the extent of the situation, somebody may need, and I'm so grateful to know people who do physical therapy work, and they specifically do abdominal physical therapy, and they're very much trained in this, and they have actually done studies with the NIH. And so whenever it's fairly rare that this happens, but if they do have those histories, sometimes I had one gentleman who said, you know what? Because I asked if they've ever had abdominal injury or trauma. And he almost didn't tell me this, but he says, I grew up, and it still happens to this day, when I see my brother, he punches me in the gut hard. It's like our little thing, but he actually, I mean, he clearly had some trauma about it. Like, he's like, yeah, I kind of laugh it off or whatever, but I'm like, how many years, how many times can you be punched in the gut without that affecting your gut? Whether it's just that emotional and energetic trigger, or if it's actually doing something to the insides that are rustling some things up and causing some inflammation that could then lead to adhesions if it was done long term. So that's something where if somebody has this really distinct history of abdominal trauma in any way, or endometriosis, I might say time out. Before we do anything else, let's investigate this first. Because again, you're just going to be spinning around if you don't identify that you have adhesions, and that's part of the problem. And I'd rather somebody invest in untangling adhesions first. Now, mind you, some people, and particularly physical therapy that I refer people to, they want them to be on some form of a protocol to get them started, so that while they're untangling things, they are on herbs or antibiotics or something to help aid the process and help aid the healing. So that's just something else that I thought would be important to mention for this audience that might be a factor. And if your doctor hasn't asked you or hasn't looked into that, it's really important. I actually had somebody recently say, well, my doctor just ordered an x-ray with a liquid that they needed to take, which is most commonly this barium swallow study that we actually is what I am speaking of. And I've say, for example, I've had somebody who's had this procedure done, and I asked them, did it feel like you just went through a copy machine? It was just like me, and then it was over. And they'll be like, yeah. And I was like, yeah, that wasn't done properly. So there's actually a specific verbiage that doctors need to use to say, look, I actually need you to do it this way so that you isolate each loop of bowel and take spot films so that we can look for these right angles instead of curves. And if a doctor doesn't know that, they just say, let me just order this. It's like ordering something without asking if is it gluten free and does that have dairy in it, right? It's like you're just going to get what the standard dish is. And sometimes these radiologists aren't too happy with seeing these very specific instructions. They're like, oh, this person knows what they're talking about, and it's going to make me kind of work a little bit. But sometimes you get these really great radiologists who are like, ooh, thank goodness. Like I get to do my job and I get to really help this person, because otherwise it could have, quite frankly, been a waste of time to just get Xeroxed, where it's like, me, you're not getting in there and seeing these really specific things. So,
I think that's part of the frustration though, right? Is like if if we don't speak up and ask and advocate for ourselves, the standard practice right now for the majority is not to go the extra mile to find those things out, right? And so we stay in these loops and we're trying the next thing that we're seeing, and we're quick to run to take the next supplement, and like trying to find any type of relief to start to feel normal. Like I can remember a time when my husband and I were out to dinner and we finished eating and I went, "Oh my God, I'm not bloated." And he was like, "What do you mean?" I was like, "Don't you get like puffy and bloated every time you eat?" He was like, "No." Do you? And I was like, "I'm more surprised by not being bloated right now than the other way around." So it's just like, I don't know. It's such a long windy process. Where do you recommend people begin? Because I know if anyone that's listening to this, they've been on a journey, right? So what are some a few recommended next steps that you have for people that maybe we haven't tried?
Well, I will say that I am different than a lot of people. Even when I talk to PR people who have had me in publications, they'll say, I'm actually going to say, just say no to probiotics. And they'll go, and they'll kind of look at me and they'll be like, oh my God, that's great. Let's get an article out about that. I did a television segment about that as well. So that's kind of my number one. It can shock people. I say, look, I'll have people take a time out for probiotics and even fermented foods. And sometimes this can be the greatest thing ever. Some people notice immediate relief. And then I also like to tell people to wait up to 21 days, because it may take some time before they really notice, oh, it has been ever since I paused that probiotic. I'm not anti-probiotic. I like to use them more specifically, like in the vagina, in the nose, in specific areas other than our gut. Um, Unless somebody says, I swear this probiotic helps me with XYZ. That gentleman, the CEO that did the flight, he swears this particular probiotic helps his sleep. And he also trusted me enough to pause it for a time period to then see the sleep disruption. We resumed the probiotic and it definitely helped him with his sleep. And I'm like, you got me. Like, it's not like it's not my ego here. It's like, I'm the coach, you're the athlete. Like, I can just see the plays, I can see what might be best for you, type of a thing. So that's my number one thing. Like, even when I'm at a happy hour with my colleagues, they'll come up to me and they'll be like, "So," and I'm like, great, we have a
Here we
SIBO case
go.
to talk about. And number one, I'll ask them, I'm like, are they on a probiotic? And with all due professional courtesy and respect, there are quite a few practitioners out there that, and I'll just tell you, this is the behind the scene folks, that they go, well, what am I going to do to replace that income? Because they have them on auto renew for their supplements. And I like to say that that's not me. I extend my professional discount to people for supplements, because I'd rather have it be like, show me your feedback. Tell me what you think about that. Is it worth $30? What does it do for you? If you shrug your shoulders, I'll go, okay, that makes sense, because this is X, Y, and Z, and it's not going to really blow your skirt up, type of thing. But if it's this one and we're giving it to you, I'm looking for some really specifics here. I may not want to tell them what it is. I'd rather them, discover it, because I'm also including epigenetics in my programs where I want to know the but why. I call myself the eternal 4-year-old, but why? But why? Just like, because there are other things that people can have. So number one, getting back to that, is probiotics, pause the probiotics. Number two, and this is very, very common, and it's pretty rampant even in naturopathic medicine, is this assumption that it's due to low stomach acid. So this is my second pet peeve, is that people think it's low stomach acid, so they go on apple cider vinegar or they start taking betaine HCl. And I'll emphasize these letters here, HCl. So we are contributing a hydrogen. And it was actually one of my colleagues and one of the lead researchers at Cedars-Sinai that said that. He said, I would be really careful giving your methane patients, even your hydrogen patients, HCl, because you're just putting a hydrogen into the system, putting a hydrogen into the stomach. And I thought to myself, oh no. And clinically, I had had it, and some other people had had it, where and this is where, again, placebo is powerful, where you feel like it's helping you initially. But then when you reflect back on a week up to 21 days, your constipation has actually gotten worse. So I saw that over and over again, and I thought, oh no. So I started to do this very old school. I have a number of people roll their eyes at me, especially gastroenterologists, because it's this radio frequency capsule called a Heidelberg pH test. And it's not a string test that we can do in the office. You actually need to go to a facility that does this specifically. And even the capsule itself to doctors, the cost to doctors is around $100. And you have to have a doctor do this test. So it can be cost, drain, it takes time, etc. Right? So it can be a few $100s to get this test done. But I ran it in just for statistics reasons. I like to use these numbers because I've done over 100 Heidelberg pH tests. But out of 100 people, only 5 people technically had what we refer to as hidden hypochlorhydria or low stomach acid. And that means that the capsule landed in the stomach, you're given something that mimics a meal, and it takes those stomach acid cells a longer amount of time to reacidify. It's not that there's no stomach acid, because that is a rare condition that you do not want. That is an autoimmune condition, not good, okay? Or just saying it's very rare. But that, it's kind of like the gluten sensitivity versus allergy
Right.
type of conversation. So this is where I was like, only 5 people, whereas 5 people had regular, regular function or optimal function. I don't like to say normal, I just like to say optimal function. You give them the drug, the herbs, the diet, and you don't see them again. They're like, okay, great. And I'd love to see those people come back too, because they like to work on other things to be like, okay, now what do we do to keep this away and at bay? But 90% of people had this overproduction of gastric acid, so more HCl. So as I referred to it earlier, it's these Pac-Man pellets from Miss Pac-Man methane, that's the constipated, and then hydrogen sulfide likes 5, and hydrogen sulfide is now what we know is the diarrheal culprit. So hydrogen is really just this fuel source. Methanes are slow things down. And hydrogen sulfide, which is also that sulfide, is that fragrancy part. So that's where people might say, yes, it does smell sulfurous, a rotten egg, a dead body, a whatever, light the candle, turn on the fan, do all the things, right?
Right.
So that's that potent, pungent smelling. And we can, and methane and hydrogen sulfide are duking it out for this Pac-Man pellet. So you can have somebody who has slower, harder to pass, what have you, not as much of a frequency, but it's foul smelling when it does come out. So those things are indicators for me that after seeing 90 people that had high stomach acid production, and they don't always have reflux, that is very common. In fact, sometimes they're annoyed that their gastroenterologist put them on what's referred to as a proton pump inhibitor. And that's just kind of, I like to say, putting duct tape over the mouth of these cells And we don't really want to do that long term because there are side effects and there are mineral deficiencies and vitamin deficiencies that can come from that. Whereas I do more of a transient, literally a pH tonic that I say, take this before your meals, take this after your meal. And it's pretty miraculous, Laura, I have to tell you, because I used to have to go, okay, there might be this, you might be up to 6 rounds of treatment. You get your breath test and your numbers go up. They go down, they go up. And so people are like, well, I'm done with antibiotics, done, can we move to herbals? And then they run through the gamut of herbals. So I just want people to know there are different herbal treatments, and there are many practitioners who might have, let's say, quote, a protocol. And if you can be more specific, just say, can I just do these antimicrobials is what we call them. That's the kill phase, if that might be what they refer to it as. But I'd like to maybe not take this probiotic just quite yet. I'd rather do that with expanding my food. I'd rather bring in my favorite kimchi or my yogurt again slowly as my probiotic. I really support probiotic in a food as medicine versus a take it as a supplement, because we have absolutely very limited, I was going to say no, but somebody's going to debate me on this, but we don't have a lot of reproducible evidence that says said supplement, said probiotic equals this in your gut and this diversity and this presentation, right? So I like to save people the $500 and not do multiple stool tests because it's just a snapshot in time. It doesn't, and I've never seen anybody that has said to me, and I'm talking practitioners, I'm talking the testing companies themselves, they have never been able to show me the reproducible protocol, the guaranteed, you spent this money on this test, you're going to take XYZ, you're going to have these changes. Never seen it. I ask everybody, and I'm in the circles, folks.
You're hearing it from the front line.
So I like to tell people, save that money. Let's spend it on food. Let's spend it on that vacation you're going on, to go see how well you can eat whatever you want, But for me, it's more about addressing pH. It's for me about getting rid of those Pac-Man pellets. And when I did this, I love this story. I had a woman who came to me in LA, and they're seeing all the people, and we all know each other. And they had just gotten through a round of their antibiotics, and their breath tests had gone up. And we're talking pretty high numbers, like we're talking in the hundreds. So it's not as easy to equate that as a severe case, but let's just say for the length of time they've been working on it, it was severe to them, right? And they're like, this just got worse. They come to see me. I sent them for a Heidelberg pH test. I tell them, I said, look, I'd really like to keep this very, very simple so that we have no question about what has changed. If we can, let's kind of basically stop all medications that aren't essential medications, right? If you're on thyroid or something like that, we're going to maintain that, or blood pressure meds. But let's just kind of pause all of your lovely supplements that you have. We can go shopping again with what you've already got. And let's just do this one thing so I can isolate that this is the only thing that's been different since, in this time. So I sent them out the door with this, like, just take this drink before and after their meals type of a thing. I honestly thought I would never see this woman again. I was like, she thinks I'm completely nuts. Like, I'm going to have a negative review or whatever. Like, I was like, oh no, I don't know if that translated very well. She comes back in 2 weeks with a negative breath test. And she's like, WTF, like, you've got to explain this to me. Not only does she bring it to me, she sends it to everybody's getting updated on her records. And in fact, the breath testing company was like, so what'd you do with this round? And I said, this is it. I dealt with the pH of the stomach. That's it. That's the only thing that we did here. And it was completely negative. Now, before, like I said, if I saw certain gas levels, I'd be like, okay, we're going to maybe take a few rounds meaning weeks of treatment to get this knocked down, like whack-a-mole. Okay. No, this was just 2 weeks, such high levels, and it was negative. In fact, it was like, even I had to like get my glasses and go, okay, this is officially negative. Now, mind you, did she feel fabulous in those 2 weeks, killing off and getting rid of all of that pretty high levels of microbes? Not necessarily. She started to towards the end of the second week, right? But there is this concept called die off, so you can kind of be going through a little bit of a when am I going to feel better as these things are dying off and being eliminated from our system. So that was a really profound case to me to be like, okay, you're on to something. You're not crazy. Let's proceed with this. And when I see more and more people, thinking of somebody who came to see me on Christmas Eve, was surprised that I was open, and within days was feeling better,
Mm.
not weeks, not dietary. I actually told her to throw the diet. I call them stack the papers of all the diets and everything you've ever read, throw it up into the air, and then pick up the things that you like, that resonate with you, that are in season, that your family's having, and have small amounts of them. But eventually, I'd like you to have that food freedom. And so to hear back from them by the New Year's, she's like, my family thanks you, that I'm already on this process. Now there is some thinking and some shifting that we have to do. Sometimes there's energetics going on. So I also do energy work with people, and they often really like that addition because sometimes they have to unlearn and unprogram themselves of what they've been doing for so many years, because it's like they kind of almost don't believe it. They want the results, but then when they get them, they're like, wait a minute, what kind of magic is she? What kind of
What are,
wand does she
what is
have?
this witchcraft?
Yeah, or it might be for women that we need to go through a couple of cycles, menstrual cycles, to really get this down. And so when I talk to women, I'm always like, if there's anything about bloating or I'll be like, what day is it of your cycle? So if they're communicating with me, they'll be like, okay, day 2, this is the situation. Day 19, and I'm like, okay, see, this isn't broccoli. This isn't that. This is what's going on in your hormonal system. We can work on that also with epigenetics. So getting back to that, these methane, they like to deconjugate our bile. And bile itself is already antimicrobial. So that's why they're going, neener, neener, bile, you can't kill me. But bile also helps us recycle our hormones. So that's why our hormones and our moods and our brain and all these things can get off too. So that's where I actually was using ox bile from an ox, to treat methane cases. So for those of you who that's an option, I've actually titrated people up to help facilitate a bowel movement. And that was actually really amazing, to be honest with you. That was one of the treatment plans I went through for a while, until this epigenetic report was available in 2016. Because I thought to myself, again, that 4-year-old, but why? Why did this person get up to this amount of ox bile? This person only used a small amount of ox bile. And it turned out there was reasonings, an epigenetic propensity for this person that needed more ox bile, that their body didn't have enough of the supplies to make their own bile. So I'm one of these people. So it didn't matter if I was taking bitters or, even supporting myself with ox bile. When I removed that bile, so that exogenous, right, that bring in the band-aid, when I took that away, I would fall back again. So
Mm.
I was like, oh, I must need help with my own body's production of bile. And so there are certain components and certain nutrients that we can integrate to then support our body's bile production. And that's what I refer to as epigenetics, because you are your unique fingerprint, snowflake, whatever reference you want to make, to be like, you're an N of one, and there might be something different going on with you. That's why I say when any doctor gives you a protocol, I don't want to say red flag, but I might say yellow flag, in the sense that if it's given to everyone, it's not customized to you. And it might be the best thing that's ever happened to some of you, but if you're doing it over and over, or you're going from person to person or coach to coach, and they're kind of giving their version of their protocol, that might be when you want to seek somebody out who does have more, either a specialization like myself. I've been doing pretty much just SIBO for 10 years, and or really get into with somebody who does epigenetics. I think that's really essential, in
Okay.
my humble opinion.
Absolutely. Well, I think that this entire conversation is a solid reminder that one, to trust yourself. If something still doesn't feel right, then trust that. But two, to really find the right partner. And as frustrating as hell as it is, it
Yeah.
takes time to find the right person. But I think it's conversations like this that bring this to light, to say, okay, like there are people out there that can help me, that see my body through a different lens, not through just the generic lens that we're looking at everybody through. And probably more importantly than anything, that healing is possible, that you can feel better, that you can live again, that you don't have to. Gosh, I think at one point there were like 40 different foods that I was not allowed to touch, right? And like that,
Mhm.
it's just a shit way to live, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just finding the right person, the right support, and trusting that if your body's always speaking to you, we just got to listen.
Yes, for sure. And are you in a better place now?
No,
Yeah.
I mean, I will say kind of a little
Yeah.
bit. Things
You're
have
on the
gotten a little.
journey, like you
I
said.
I
Yeah.
am on the journey. Things have gotten a little bit better, but it is. I am not at optimal. So it is.
Okay.
I'm continuously on that journey, and maybe we can have a chat afterwards.
Yeah. Well, no, thank you for sharing, because it is. I mean, things can happen. I had a traumatic, something happen in my life, and so you can have setbacks. But if you at least know the tools, you can get back in there and like go, okay, let's fix the car because this is what worked last time, or we didn't realize the carburetor, like there are other things that might be attached to it. So that's
Right.
important. And thank you for sharing. And thank you so much for having me. I really hope that this helps at least one person, if not many, because I just want them to know that you don't have to suffer. You really can have this life of freedom and non-bloating. I know exactly what you mean by saying, I mean, you can make your plans. And it's happened to me recently where my friend doesn't exactly understand. I'm like, you have no idea what I feel like in my body right now. And you might be raring to go and want to go out and go out to dinner and all these things. I'm just not feeling it,
Right.
you know? And yet on the days that I am, and it's just because some life stuff is happening. It's another example, but it's like, I know how to handle my situation better. Um, but it's not to say that I'm immune from it completely, because
Right.
I have had this skip in the record. So just know that we can have our good days and our bad days. We just hope to have more of the good days, and it is possible.
Absolutely. I know that there are lots of inquisitive minds right now and hungry for more information. So where can everyone find and connect with you?
So you can connect with me on my website is SIBO solution singular.com. That's specifically for SIBO. And I also have the Intuitive Edge Doctor, which I do SIBO treatments, but we add in a little more of the energy work and epigenetics and other things there if that resonates with people.
Amazing. We'll make sure we have all of those links in the show notes. And my favorite and final question for you is, what does the word gutsy mean to you?
Hoopspa. Just having that, I would call that self-advocacy in anything you do. Just saying like, I know and I will find what's right for me.
Absolutely. I love it. Thank you so much for your time and incredible amount of wisdom that you shared with us today. I know that you got a lot of minds turning, so thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure.
On this Thursday's Power Back episode, we're going to talk about boundaries. Oh, boundaries. You hear that a lot. We know how impactful they can be, but holding true to them can be a real fucking challenge. That's why in this week's Power Back, we're going to break down what are boundaries, how to create them, and then maybe even most importantly, how to uphold them. If you're online, come over and say hi. You can find me on Facebook the most, but I'm also on TikTok and Instagram. You can find me using @thatlauraora. And as always, until I see you next time, stay gutsy.